So we've been rapidly followed up with some pretty in-depth rules for Mr. Parasite. This thing's going to be winging its way around the battlefield super fast, and if it hits you and then moves on, there's a good chance your unit's going to gradually dissolve into Ripper swarms over the next few turns. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where a couple of hours ago we were talking about the new leaked Parasite and mortrex model. Games Workshop accidentally posted it on Warhammer Community, and I believe in general if they do accidentally leak things like this, they do try and tend to release their own article with the preview that they already had scheduled, as it's kind of impossible to ignore the fact that a new model's been started, and I feel that they want to have the main source of Warhammer news to be coming from them. In any case, they have been quite on it today. They've followed up the previous leak with some nice pictures of the model in good resolution, and also a rather surprising amount of quite fun new rules for the guy, an interesting looking stat line, and we basically know how his fun implanting rippers and then having them burst out of you rule is going to take effect, and it does seem like it's quite interesting. Maybe interesting isn't the word that you'd use if it was actually happening to you though. So here are the new high resolution pictures of the Parasite then. I think we could basically see it already fairly well from the leaked pictures to be honest, but basically a sort of half warrior, half ravener, a whole load of injector and claw type tentacles, and some weird leathery looking bat wings. As we mentioned in the previous video, this guy's the Parasite and Mortrex, an experiment of the hive mind that had rules in a previous Tyrannid Codex. It never had a model, but now it does, and its lore is that it wings around, jabbing people with its barbed tail, implanting some ripper embryos, feeling kind of similar to the Alien films, and then they burst out of you in spectacular fashion, sometimes very soon after it was injected. Definitely has possibility for some very fun rules in game, and that does seem to be what Games Workshop has delivered. So first up we have the Parasite stat line then. Movement of 6 inches, weapon skill 2+, ballistic skill 3+, not that we know whether it's got any ranged weapons or not, strength 5, toughness 5, 6 wounds, 6 attacks, leadership 8 and a 4+ save. I'd say maybe the most standout thing is that massive 16-inch movement, which combined with fly is going to give it a crazy threat range. It'd be very possible indeed for this to be jumping straight into the enemy deployment zone turn 1, even without any other speed boosts that it might be able to pick up through the various hive fleets, which I'm sure there'll be at least some of. It's also maybe surprisingly beefy as well in terms of strength and defense, strength and toughness 5. I feel that maybe this is to keep it in line with Tyrannid warriors, which are supposedly going to go up to that amount. I believe that in the background this guy's supposed to be a heavily mutated Tyrannid warrior. He's only got a 4+ save though, so maybe that's going to stay the same for warriors even if their strength and toughness gets boosted. 6 wounds and 6 attacks are also fairly nice. The attacks are basically going to depend on what sort of main melee weapon it gets as to whether or not they're scary, but at least it's not so fragile that you're just going to gun it down with a single volley of anti-infantry weapons. Secondly, we know that it's got synapse as well. We don't know how much they're going to reimagine this synaptic web in the new Tyrannid Codex, but I think it's unlikely to be a bad thing to have another source for it wandering around, particularly on such a fast body as well. It does mean that you could potentially get a synaptic bubble exactly where you need it, and perhaps it might have some sort of synaptic link ability as well. They are rumoured to be reimagined in the new codex with individual buffs for each unit. Potentially it could do something interesting. In the Warhammer community article, Games Workshop specifically mentioned that it could be particularly good with gargoyles. Whether or not it's actually going to have anything specific to buff them, or whether it's just helpful for providing synapse, we won't know. I guess in theory as a winged synapse thing, it does have a bit of natural tendency to be alongside them. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, the melee profile isn't really all that revealed at the moment. Those big long sinuous claws, we don't know what they're going to do. It's going to have strength 5 at the very least, so it's going to be somewhat of a threat to light infantry. The biggest question is whether or not it's going to get any decent amounts of AP or multi-damage on those attacks. If it strikes at damage 2, it's going to be quite likely to chew up Space Marines fairly nicely. I wouldn't be too surprised though if they just wind up being damage 1. They do look fairly slender and not all that meaty as talons go. In any case, whatever it's going to be doing normally, it's going to back it up with this barbed ovipositor, which it seems to get as an additional attack on top of whatever else it's going to do. Ovipositor is basically the name for an insect's egg-laying tube, and probably not the sort of thing that you really want jabbed into you. You only get to make the one attack with it. It's strength 6 and AP -1 and damage 1, so kind of underwhelming in its own damage, but it has the Parasitic Infection special rule, which means that in addition to normal damage, you also take a mortal wound if you make a successful wound roll against a non-vehicle. Kind of unreliable against anything besides toughness 3, but bear in mind that this could easily be re-rolled with a command reroll, meaning that anything up to toughness 6 should have a really good chance of being infested if you desperately want it to. For the Ripper spawning rule, basically if you have managed to get the infestation off on an enemy unit, they'll take that initial mortal wound and then they get a few different rules applied. The first one, and quite a handy one, is called It Itches. While the enemy is infested, it no longer has the objective secured special rule. So if this thing's fighting alongside some Hormigants or something, then you're going to be able to take away enemy objectives for them, provided they don't shrug the infection. Kind of handy, but as there's a fairly reasonable chance of the enemy getting rid of it before they actually score objectives, I do feel it's a bit unreliable. In any case though, provided you haven't already wiped out the enemy units between this guy's attacks and anything else that was charging, in the next enemy command phase, the infection starts to take effect. Regardless of whatever else happens, the enemy will take D3 mortal wounds, so pretty much guaranteed extra damage there if they do survive. And if you roll a 2 or 3 on that D3 roll, then you get to activate the fun Ripper spawning thing, setting up a swarm of Rippers within 3 inches of the enemy unit that was infected. Basically a 2 out of 3 chance, all very visceral and fun, very easy to imagine them bursting out the chest of a luckless enemy opponent, and you could potentially do some very gamey things with having new models deploying in the enemy command phase. If they get very lucky, they might be able to contest or maybe even take an objective, or you could position them in such a way that the enemy is going to struggle to move around them, maybe move blocking something key. It could potentially even close a movement avenue to something like an enemy vehicle or monster perhaps. I don't think I'm the most optimistic for them actually doing all that much damage, to be honest. Rippers are at least relatively easy to kill, and they're guaranteed to have at least some enemy units right up next to them. So there's a good chance that they'll just get wiped out just due to incidental fire or maybe even a small countercharge, but whenever they do survive, that's going to be a useful little option to have on the board. Thankfully they've thought about reinforcement points for this, saying that those models won't cost any. I feel like at this stage they could probably just ditch the entire reinforcement point mechanic, as it just basically means that any rules that interact with it are kind of unused. Following that, after the chest bursting shenanigans, you roll a dice. On a 4+, the unit remains infected and still lacks obsec, but on a 1 to 3 the infection is cured. I guess in theory, if you did jab an enemy unit with the parasite early in the game, you could have multiple turns worth of damage dealing with this, an isolated squad ground down by mortal wounds and having to deal with random rippers spawning. That's going to be a pretty horrible feeling for that squad if they are gradually chipped away like this. I do feel that that sort of thing might be a little bit hard to achieve though. The parasite really is going to need to wing from unit to unit and spread that infection as quickly as possible. The Ripper spawning thing might just be a bit redundant if you do happen to just wipe out the enemy infantry unit anyway, so I guess it might come into effect a bit less than normal. I feel if any of the hive fleets allow you to fall back and charge with units in the new codex, then the Parasite might be a good fit with them, as it could mean that they could potentially charge a unit, infest it, and then fall back and charge something else to infest another. Seems like it could be quite a fun little nightmare with those kind of rules. So anyway, a fun new model, plenty of cool new rules. Let me know what you think of them down in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly try and keep up with any Tyranids previews that come out, and I do look forward to reviewing the book in full once it's out. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, and you can find that down in the video description below. Channel patrons do get a few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.